Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, we're going to discuss hiring and retention of good officers. So, why is it important to hire good officers? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Obviously, we want to serve the community as successfully, responsibly, and legally as we can. Um, Today's rank and file that come through the door are tomorrow's leaders. It's tomorrow's leadership. It's tomorrow's administration. These are the people who will be promoted down the line. So, we want to hire quality people coming through the door. And because of liability issues, right, which we talked about in the last chapter. We talked about vicarious liability, and we talked about, um, you know, the fact that we want to minimize those civil lawsuits. We want to minimize the funds that we pay out. We want to minimize harm to the community, and we want to minimize negative perceptions to the community. So there's a really good paragraph from your text that I want to cite, and I'm going to read it here. And it says, in cases in which law enforcement managers directed, ordered, or participated in the acts, they are equally liable. In addition, if upper level managers are negligent in hiring, assigning, training, retaining, directing, or entrusting, they may be liable even though they are not present. So it's very important, first of all, to start with a quality crop of individuals, because negligent hiring is something that, it makes you rife for civil lawsuits. And negligent hiring is going to be defined as, failing to do a thorough vetting. You didn't do a proper background check, and therefore you hired somebody who is inadequate. They're ill suited to the work. They're irresponsible, and they cause trouble for your organization. So in order to have the option at good officers, the optimal circumstance is that any organization wants to bring in as many possible applicants as they can. You want to bring in notably more applicants than you could possibly employ, because you want to be choosy. You want to have the ability to look at 300 applicants and say, I only need 20, so I'm picking the very best 20 out of this lot, because that's what we want. Right? Excuse me. This is a big issue currently. Due to negative police sentiment from the community in the last several years, there have been mass retirements. There have been a lot of officers who changed careers, which has left us with an officer shortage, and it's also left us in a situation where there is not a huge amount of people to recruit from. Right? People are a little hesitant right now to get into law enforcement, so we don't have a giant pool to choose from, which means we have to work with what we have, and that's not optimal. Right? We don't want to just settle for what we have to work with. We want to choose the best of the group. So, what are some recruiting strategies for law enforcement? Job fairs are, just like any other field. Criminal justice majors are a big one. Criminal justice is one of the biggest majors, fastest growing majors in colleges and universities across the United States. So that offers us a really big crop to choose from. And second, career officers. It's not at all uncommon. Law enforcement retires early, so it's not at all uncommon for, say, somebody to start a career at the state police at 21 years old. They entered at a time when it was a 20 years and now retirement, so they're retired at 41, which is way too young to be done working, right? So what a lot of people do is move on to different areas of law enforcement. So you may have been a state police officer for 20 years, and now you're going to train to become a sheriff deputy. Right, so second career officers are also a big recruiting strategy. Another focus on recruitment is we want police to look like the people they're policing, right? So we want to have enough diversity in the police field that, if there's a high amount of minorities, we want a good number of minorities on the police force to engage with those people. Clearly, half of everybody is female, so we want to have more women, right? Because we don't want to just have men. We want women officers who can respond to female victims. So there is a big push for a couple of things. First of all, engaging more women in becoming law enforcement members, and that is growing by leaps and bounds. And also engaging people who are minorities who are bilingual, because there is a huge bilingual population in the United States, and we need people who can speak multiple languages. So what's the selection process? This varies from agency to agency, but I'm going to give you just sort of a generic look at what this looks like for most agencies, if not all. So the first step is going to be an application. Okay. The selection process for law enforcement is very long and detailed. It's not like another job where you put in an application, you have 2 interviews, boom, you're hired. So it's much more detailed. So the selection process is you're going to put in an application, and from there you're going to be entering into testing and screening. They're going to do background searches to narrow the field of applicants. If we get 300 people and we do background searches on all 300 people and we find 70 of those people have previously been arrested or previously have some kind of record, well, that's really easy exclusion criteria. You guys are off the table, right? Because we have 230 people over here who've never been arrested, 70 who have. We want the ones who haven't, right? You're going to move on to written tests, which are going to detail whether or not you have the basic proficiency skills to be tested. As a law enforcement officer, you're going to write a lot of reports. Those reports are going to go into the court system. You are going to be on the stand. Your reports are going to be combed through and questioned by defense attorneys. So we want to make sure that you have basic proficiency to be able to write a decent report and to represent a report that will stand up to rigorous questioning. There's a medical exam. Law enforcement is a really interesting job. You could be sitting behind a desk writing a report 1 minute, or you're out and about, engaging in physical activities the next, right? So you need to be fit. You need to be healthy. You need to be able to see and hear and all of those things. So you have to pass a medical exam. We talked about background checks. In addition to just checking to see that if you have a criminal background, they're going to, so for example, like Pennsylvania State Police, federal law enforcement agencies, their background checks are incredibly thorough. They're going to talk to previous employers. They're going to talk to family members. They're going to visit neighbors, and they're going to ask them questions about you. They will run a credit check, right? And see, are you responsible? Are you paying your bills? Because if you have terrible credit and massive debt, you're going to be in a position where you're going to, handle a lot of unchecked money, right? Or be offered money by people. And people with bad credit and lots of debt are more susceptible to being bribed. So they're going to run a credit check. They're going to see, do you have previous convictions? What's your education? Do you have past substance abuse issues? So the background checks can be incredibly thorough. You have to pass a psychological examination. It is typically the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. That's sort of the go-to psych exam, and it's gonna test you for what's your stress tolerance. Do you have impulse control? Are you emotionally stable? Do you have social tolerance? And if it indicates that you are lacking these things, it's going to wash you out because policing is an incredibly stressful job and we need somebody who can maintain emotions and maintain objectivity and impartiality. There's a physical fitness test. Like I said, law enforcement is very physical. You have to have strength. You have to have endurance. There will be, a series of tests. It's usually like, can you run a mile in under 12 minutes, a certain number of sit-ups, a certain number of push-ups, et cetera, that you have to be able to do in order to stay in the applicant pool. There will be an in-person interview. You want to prepare for this. You don't want to go in cold, right? This is something you should be role playing with somebody else. I would see if you can get your hands on some interview questions somewhere and role play so that you're not going into this cold. You want to establish a rapport and you want to appear that, you're coming in prepared. Because remember, everybody else is interviewing too. You want to be able to distinguish yourself. State and federal agencies may require a polygraph, and regardless of what it says online, you cannot beat a polygraph. Okay, at the very best, it could be inconclusive. But if we've got a bunch of what we call past polygraphs and, a bunch of inconclusive, they're going to go with the past polygraphs. Okay, so please do not fall into that fallacy. Excuse me. Law enforcement agencies are also leaning more towards requiring education. This is something that is relatively new to the field of policing. Used to be something you could just come right out of high school and do. For the past several decades, more agencies have been saying, hey, we want at least 60 college credits. And more agencies are saying, no, we want a bachelor's degree. Why? Because this education emphasizes problem solving. It emphasizes critical thinking. It exposes you to more diversity. It gives you more of a sociological context about why crime happens, what the driving factors are, which will impact the way you police. So that is something that's becoming more common. I want to shift gears and talk about the importance of training. This is what I do outside of HACC is I work in law enforcement training. And the importance of training is it's incredibly central to law enforcement. Ongoing training is a must. This isn't something that you train once and then you spend 25 years of your career never training again. A lot of skills in law enforcement are what we call perishable skills, meaning that if you don't practice them, they are going to fade. They're going to go away. And the reason we do that ongoing training is because we want to reduce risk for both law enforcement and the community. Law enforcement has a ton of training in a myriad of areas. Firearms training, that's a big perishable skill. You need to get out on the range and practice regularly. We have, the difference, our constables are not mandated here in Pennsylvania to get out all that often. They usually get out about once a year, and we see a big difference between their success and their efficacy versus officers who are mandated to get out there regularly. There's a huge difference. So firearms training, defensive tactics, use of force, civil law, criminal law, these are all things that, there's constant changes in the law that, we need to update and have continuous training on. So a good example of why we need to keep current with training is things are always changing. We're always learning new things, and it's going to impact how you do the job. So 20 to 30 years ago in law enforcement, we did not train officers on mental illness. We did not train officers on autism. But in fact, officers are going to be sort of the first line responders to a lot of people with mental illness or a lot of people with atypical brain function such as autism. And you're going to see, behaviors that you typically don't see and that you may not understand at face value. And what we used to see, especially with autism 20, 30 years ago, is officers would often respond in a way that they think this person's being combative, this person's being not compliant, I am going to escalate. And what they didn't understand or didn't realize because we hadn't been training them on it is that this is autism is a neuroatypical disease, which means their cognition functions differently than people who don't have it, which means they don't communicate as well and they don't understand your communications as well, and they might not make eye contact. And then when stress rises, they might begin to experience frustration and severe anxiety that manifests itself in ways that are different than the general population. Well, this was causing a lot of situations where, officers were escalating use of force on people who literally have issues that need to be recognized and managed differently. So we started training officers to recognize signs of autism so that this person is not being difficult. They're not purposefully being non-compliant. They are autistic. And what we saw is those negative engagements with the autism community went way down once we started training officers to recognize what autism looks like. This is why training needs to be continuous. Now, successive training is going to depend on the individual and how seriously they take it. The old saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink is absolutely true. So if officers just show up to training just to, mark the box and be done with it, you're not going to take away very much. But if you see this as something that is necessary information and they are necessary skills to obtain, and you're more likely to absorb that content and practice that content beyond the training. It's important for training curriculum to stay up to date because crime data changes all the time. Case law changes, right? We have new cases that change the law, and we have old cases that get struck down all the time. Legislation changes, right? So it's important for training to stay up to date. It's important to have effective trainers. Excuse me, if you have a trainer and they don't really know what they're doing, or they're just not terribly effective at their job, the whole room can see that, can smell that, and are going to either think this is a waste of my time and therefore they're not going to obtain and absorb the training, or worse than that, they're going to take them at face value and maybe somebody's training in the wrong information, right? And then you're like, well, this is what the trainer said, so this is what I do, right? So it's really important to have effective trainers who know their job, who know how to teach, and who do a good, thorough job of training. Training is changing in recent years. We still have a lot of in-person training. There's a lot of training that can only be done in person, like defensive tactics, like firearms. But there's a lot of training that is now being delivered online as well, which saves time, it saves money, and it's something that can be done at an officer's leisure. We want to incorporate simulations training into training, problem-based learnings where we give, the trainees or the cadets, we give them scenarios where there's role playing. One's the officer, one's the victim, or one's the community member. And, here's the scenario and what would you do and what are the possible reactions, etc. So again, it's just preparation rather than just going out into the community cold. We also have simulations such as Laser Shot, which is a really cool program where there's multiple recorded circumstances. There's a fake gun that literally the laser points, and it's a use of force training. Does this instance require me to, break out my weapon and fire, or doesn't it? Right? It gives you actual training, and it's actually very it's very real. The academy is training for new recruits. So everybody who becomes an officer will go to basic training. It's a period of time. Everybody does it differently, but it can be 4 months, it could be 6 months. It's paramilitaristic in nature, but it's also academic in nature where you're going to sit in the classroom and you're going to learn content. But there's also just a lot of simulations and hands-on training. There's also field training, and this is training, after you've left the academy, where you are now working, you are out in the field, you've been deployed, but you're going to be learning on the job. You're going to be learning while you work. Typically with field training, they pair you with a field training officer who becomes a mentor, who will see what you do and see how you respond and say, okay, let me give you some suggestions about how to handle that in the future that might go better, be easier, more successful in obtaining compliance, etc. And finally, it's really important with training to have needs identification, to talk to the law enforcement field, the people who are out there regularly and saying, what do you guys need training on? What are you seeing all the time that you want to know more about, or you don't feel completely confident in your skill set and you want more education and practice on, etc. And then, of course, evaluating that training, talking to officers after they've taken that training and saying, is this meeting your training needs? Do you feel better going out on the street doing XYZ after this training?